They gave me a cardboard box in 20 minutes. That's not resentment talking, it's just the fact of it. The new CEO, Diane Calloway, had taken over the estate in April after her father passed. And by the time the last peaches came off the ridgeline trees in October, she had already replaced the irrigation system, rebranded the label, and hired a consulting firm out of Richmond to modernize what she called the estate's operational footprint. I was part of the old footprint, a seasonal hand, no degree, no certification beyond what 40 years of working soil will give a man. Operations director, a young fellow St. Preston, who wore clean boots in the orchard, handed me the box personally and said they were moving to a managed services model. He was polite about it. That made it easier and harder at the same time. I put my pruning log in the box, soil notebook, a photograph of my late wife Ruth, standing in the lower grove the spring we first came to Calloway Ridge. I left the field logs in the locked cabinet in the corner of the barn, the big ones. 7 seasons of them, every intervention I'd ever made, written up in my own hand on the yellow legal pads I bought at the hardware store in town. I left them because they belonged to the land, not to me. Then I drove down the ridge road to meet Caleb's school bus at the bottom of the hill. He was 10 that fall. Dark eyes like his mother, a serious little face that broke open when he smiled. He climbed up into the truck and said, "You're early?" And I said, "Season's over, bud." And he looked at me for a moment the way kids do when they understand more than they let on. And then he said, "Okay," put his backpack between his feet and watched the road. We drove home past the lower grove. The rows were bare and clean. I had the windows down. The air smelled like cold clay and the end of something good. I want to be clear about one thing. I did not leave those logs as a trap. I left them because I had kept them faithfully for 7 years, and they were accurate and complete. A piece of me believed that whoever came next would find them useful. That is all. I took a fencing job on a property 2 counties over, moved Caleb into a new school district without complaint, and did not look back at Calloway Ridge. The rot showed up in November. I heard about it secondhand, from a man who ran the co-op supply in Sperryville. He said the lower grove was going gray at the bark, a fungal canker. The consultant said, probably the wet October. He said they'd brought in a certified agronomist from a university extension, a woman named Dr. Vargas, and that she was spending long days walking the rows. I nodded and bought my fencing staples and drove back to work. What I knew, and what Dr. Vargas would take 8 weeks to figure out, was that the lower grove had been fighting that same canker for most of the 7 years I'd worked. Calloway Ridge. It came in cycles, every second wet autumn without fail. The first time I saw it I was scared, because it can take a grove fast if you let it set. I worked out a program over 2 seasons of trial. Copper sulfate drench applied in early October before the rains. A specific pruning sequence to open the canopy and kill the moisture pockets. And a soil amendment to the root zone that I'd developed myself by reading every extension bulletin I could find and making adjustments by hand. It wasn't elegant. It was just careful, and it worked, and I did it quietly every year because it was my job to do it. The logs documented all of it. Every application date, every rate, every row number, every result. 7 years of yellow legal pad pages in my cramped handwriting, locked in the cabinet in the corner of the barn. Dr. Vargas found the cabinet in December. I learned later that she sat on an overturned crate in that barn for most of an afternoon, reading, that she called her graduate assistant and said, "You need to see this." That she brought the logs to Diane Calloway's office the next morning and set them on the desk and said, "Every recovery this estate has had in 7 years came from whoever wrote these." Shh. That Diane looked at the handwriting on the cover of the first log. Lower Grove, Season 1 E. Mays, and was quiet for a long time. The board meeting was the 2nd week of January. I was pulling fence wire in a field outside Culpeper when my phone rang. A number I didn't know, a Richmond area code. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from Preston, the operations director, and his voice was different from the day he'd handed me the box. He said Dr. Vargas had presented her audit findings to the board. He said the estate had lost 30% of the Lower Grove yield in 2 months. He said, "Diane Calloway would like to speak with me at my earliest convenience." I finished the fence line. Caleb had a math test the next morning, and I'd promised to review fractions with him after supper. I called Preston back the following afternoon. She drove out herself, I'll give her that. No Preston, no driver, just Diane Calloway in a dark coat, pulling up the gravel track to the property where I was boarding, on a gray Thursday in January. I watched her park from the porch. She was younger than I'd expected up close. Her father had run the estate for 30 years, and she'd inherited something enormous and complicated, and I think she genuinely had not known what she had. That's not an excuse, it's just the truth as I saw it. She got out of the car and walked toward the porch, and I poured a second cup of coffee and set it on the railing before she reached the steps. She looked at the cup. She looked at me. She said, "You knew I was coming." I said, "Preston called 2 days ago." She picked up the cup and held it, and didn't drink it right away. She said, "Dr. Vargas says the lower grove can be recovered. She says your protocol is the most thorough site-specific canker management she's ever seen in a working orchard, and she's been doing this for 22 years. She paused. She'd like to co-author a paper on it. I said I'd think about the paper. Diane looked out at the frost-gray field and then back at me. She said, "I owe you an apology. I came here to offer you your position back. Your wages, plus what should have been a senior land steward classification for the past 4 years. But I want to say first that I am sorry. I looked at a man with a cardboard box, and I didn't ask a single question. That was wrong. I thought about Ruth, who had taught me that an apology offered plainly and without conditions is a rare and valuable thing and should be received the same way. I thought about Caleb at his school desk 2 counties over, doing fractions. I thought about the lower grove on an October morning with the light coming sideways through the canopy and the smell of copper sulfate on my hands. Particular satisfaction of a thing done right, with no one watching, I said. I accept that. I set my own cup down on the railing and told her my condition. It wasn't complicated. I would come back to Calloway Ridge, and I would train someone. A full apprenticeship, 2 growing seasons. Everything in the logs taught by hand and explained out loud, so that the knowledge lived in a person and not just in a cabinet. Whoever that person was, they would be paid fairly and kept on. When I moved on, and someday I would, the orchard would not be starting over. She said she'd already spoken to her board about a land stewardship program and that they were in agreement. I nodded, told her I'd be at the ridge the first Monday of February. She thanked me. She walked back to her car and then stopped and turned. She said, "The photograph in the lower grove, the woman in the spring. That was your wife?" I said it was. She said, "She had a good eye for light." I said she had a good eye for everything. Then I went inside to help Caleb with his fractions. The lower grove came back that spring, every row. The canker was gone by April, the new growth came in clean, and by June the fruit was the best yield the ridge had seen in a decade, according to Dr. Vargas's measurements. She did write the paper. My name is on it, though I told her to put hers first. Caleb turned 11 in May. We drove up to the ridge one Sunday when the trees were in full blossom and walked the lower rows together, and I showed him what to look for in the bark, the early signs, the coloring, the way the canopy should breathe. He asked good questions, he always does. I don't think much about the cardboard box or the 20 minutes or the clean boots in the orchard. What I think about is the rows coming back, and the boy beside me asking good questions, and Ruth's photograph in my shirt pocket, close to where it belongs. Some things you tend carefully for years because they are worth tending. You don't need an audience for that. You just need to do it right.